Welcome to the Colours of Parenthood. In today's episode, we have Kathryn with us, who is a dedicated mom of twins and a career driven woman. Kathryn shares her unique journey of balancing motherhood and her professional life, along with the unexpected challenges she faced along the way. Hello, everyone. Today we have our guest, Kathryn. Is that how we pronounce your name?
Yep, Kathryn.
Kathryn, amazing. Could you please start with a bit about yourself, a couple sentences before I start asking questions?
Sure. Well, my name's Kathryn Tuttle, and I am the mother of two 6-year-old twin girls, and I live in a small town in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia in the United States. I've spent most of my life on the East Coast and now juggle being a parent and also being a strategy advisor to founders in the food and beverage network.
Amazing. And now, if I start with my really popular question, is how did your motherhood journey begin? Like, how was it like realizing that you're pregnant?
Well, for me, it was really quite a surprise. My husband and I spent a lot of time thinking about whether we wanted to have children and debated back and forth. We met a little bit later in life, not too late. Um, and we finally decided that, yes, we wanted to have children. And he knew it was in my heart. And so he was just like, absolutely, if we don't have kids, you'll always regret it. And so we started our journey to having kids and just assumed at a little later in life it would be a really long time. And then less than a month later, I found out I was pregnant. So it was sort of this wild, like, oh, we'll begin our journey. We'll go on fun vacations. We'll do all this stuff before we become parents. And very quickly, we became parents. And so it was pretty exciting for us. And then, as we'll get into it later, it got even more exciting after that.
So basically, it was a planned pregnancy, but you didn't expect it to be that fast.
Yes, based on all of the stories of friends and colleagues, we thought, oh, it'll be a year to get pregnant. And that wasn't our experience. So, yes, it happened way faster. Even though we had planned it, it just was way faster than we thought it would be.
And how old were you when you got pregnant?
I was 38. Yeah, I was 38.
Okay, and is that like a normal age of getting pregnant where you're from? Because it's a really different cultural aspect here when it's normal to get pregnant here is still around 25, so pretty early. And I know in the UK it's a bit later.
Well, I think it's still very mixed in the United States, and I think it has a lot to do with your educational level, where you live, and so for me, at the time, I was living in San Francisco, and so actually, my doctors joked that I wasn't old at all compared to the other women in San Francisco who were often very career driven and had put off having children. So there, I was very much among my peers. Everyone was about that age. But now I live in a more suburban and rural area in Virginia. And most of the friends who I have that are my age have kids that are in high school or in college. So it is very different. I would say I was on the older side, but not unusually old, especially for at the time where I was in an urban setting.
Hmm. And would you say that a good year to get pregnant for yourself, or would you do it even later or even earlier?
I just don't think you get that choice in life, right? I'm sure that there is a ton. Would I have loved to have more energy and to be able to stay up all night? I would have loved that. But on the flip side, I was farther along in my career and we were much more financially stable. So I wasn't worried about making ends meet and things like that. So I think I am a believer that things happen for the reason. And in the end, I had an amazing partner, and that partner I didn't meet until I was 33 years old, and I wouldn't have wanted to do it without him. So um, I that one I'm not going to try to second guess.
Yeah. Okay. And now, how was the pregnancy overall? Was it really hard?
So I think I shared with you earlier that so we found out we were pregnant. very early on. And so then we come back for the first kind of regular to confirm you're pregnant with a doctor, and went into my regular doctor who wasn't a specialist or anything, and we are getting the ultrasound, and um, she was being very quiet and she was taking quite a bit of time. And so I was beginning to worry. My head jumped to, well, perhaps, I lost the baby, there wasn't a heartbeat. And so I'm getting very nervous that there's something going wrong. And she turns to my husband after, quite a long pause and goes, Dad, what do you think this looks like? And he goes something to the tune of, oh God, just tell me it's not twins. And she turns to him and says, it's twins. And my husband and I just sat there in complete and utter shock. We sat there and I think I just sort of rocked back and forth, really being unable to even process what all of it meant. And so, being older, being at that point, I would have been 38. They said, great, we're so happy. We're going to transfer your care to a specialist. So they just sort of told us we were pregnant and kicked us out to a different doctor. So there we are. And my husband and I, we were downtown San Francisco and we thought, well, I guess we're supposed to go and celebrate. We didn't even know what to do with ourselves. And so we happened to be downtown and there was a very nice restaurant just a couple doors down. And so we walked in and we had what was the worst dinner we've ever had. We were so stressed out and, just throwing around all of these wild, like, well, of course we have to move back to where our parents live and we have to get rid of our apartment and we have to buy a new car and all of these things that never ended up happening, but we're part of sort of that wild cycle of finding out that you have twins and what that means and how you go about it. So the kickoff to my pregnancy was very exciting. But I was really lucky for someone who was 38 and had twins. I had an absolutely perfect pregnancy. I had just enough of each symptom you're supposed to have. Back pain, heartburn, just enough to say I had it. And then it really wasn't anything that you would have expected to be more or less. So I was incredibly grateful for an easy pregnancy.
Amazing. So you had like a really normal, also like the 9 months of pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was able to carry the girls to 36 and 36 weeks in one day. So essentially full term for twins. They were both born over 6 pounds, so really healthy girls. And so yeah, I didn't have any issues to speak of throughout the pregnancy. It's a little bit of a wild time because so much of the information that they have is validated for singletons. And so some of the things that they'll say, oh, well, it's definitely going to be this way, whether it's regarding certain risks or genetic testing or other things, then they tell you, well, because it's twins, we don't have enough data. So we're not really sure, which was very frustrating for someone like me who was very data driven and wanted there to be answers, which there are so few of when it comes to pregnancy.
Okay, I can only imagine how frustrating is that. Do you know like the data? What is the between singletons and twins? Like the differences?
It's just that there's so few twins. I think in the United States, it's around 3%, that when they do studies, there's just not a large enough base of twins for them to make statistical
Yeah.
significance of a separate study. So it's not that it's necessarily wrong. They just can't prove that it's right. And so for me, it was really frustrating when we were talking about different choices and testing and things to consider, because I felt like there just wasn't any information. And for me, it was a very uncertain time, and I wanted information to tell me everything would be black and white, which just isn't the way life works.
Yeah. And what were your main issues when you realized that you had twins? Like if you compare it when you thought that you had one child coming and then imagining you had two.
I don't know if there was necessarily a problem, right? Because we hadn't had any other children, so we didn't know what our experience would be. But I think one of the things that I was nervous about, and I think twins was again a unique way of sort of solving that problem was I'm someone who's very particular, very type A driven. And so I think the thought of having a child, I was ready to do everything perfectly, by the book and everything that you should be doing, right? Which no one can do. And it can be very overwhelming. And so then when I had twins, that really wasn't a choice to do everything perfectly. You're doing everything you possibly can for it, for a very busy and complex period of time, really until you kind of get your arms around what it is to have these two kids. So it gave me the freedom that I could stop trying to be perfect, and that I just could deal with what was ahead of me. So I think that was sort of the biggest shift in probably parenting. And then there's all the practical things of how you manage feedings in the middle of the night and how you navigate going out by yourself, and all of those things. You just sort of have to figure it out for your own. And we lived in a very walkable town, so I didn't really drive with the girls very much alone. That felt pretty daunting, to have them both in the back of the car and me driving without someone else there. So if there was a choice, I would just walk. And so we did a lot of time just walking around San Francisco. And luckily, it was a beautiful time of the year, August, September, October there. So was really just able to get out, and then there was no problem. You could attend to anybody who needed it right there. You didn't have to pull the car over without someone else to help.
Yeah, I really like what you said about you have a bit of an excuse to not be perfect, because all of the most mothers that I speak with, they're already have like a parental burnout going on somewhere there, because they have this perfectionist side as you have it as well, especially like career driven women. And at least you had that bit of like, okay, it's two girls at the same time, I cannot be perfect, even though even with one you can't be perfect.
Yes. Although I think, it's so hard. But just again, the one thing I wish I had done was ask for more help. I think everyone wants to provide help, but sometimes it's so daunting to figure out what you actually need. And then also, during that time, so much is out of control. So sometimes by taking care and doing, that's how you create the perception of control. But I definitely wish I had leaned more on the support network I had, as well as other people kind of that, more periphery friends who were offering. But it took me a long time to let anyone else sort of spend time with the girls without me being there. So that was something that definitely I could have used more support in those kind of first 3 months. I got used to it once we were into a bit of a more of a pattern, but being able to ask for help is is definitely something every mother should try to work on.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really a huge phenomenon worldwide, like especially in the postpartum period where women are really fragile in a way, and they should ask for support because they have this all new transformation going on, like identity transformation, role transformation, a lot of things. And this is the main issue that we find, like speaking to moms, that they don't know when to reach help also, because they don't realize they need it, even though they have the signals like externally, like can't sleep, she's not eating well, like all of those signals are there, but she's not asking for help. What do you think is the reason that moms are not seeking help?
Hmm. Um, I think it's probably a little bit different for everyone. I think for me, um, it was I've never it's been part of my personality for a very long time. I've always been independent.
Yeah.
So I think there was part of that. And then I think wanting to do it and to try to figure it out, um, and be there. And I think it probably came down to wanting to have some control. It was especially in the early days. I mean, it was literally you would sleep for 2 hours, and with twins, I did what was called triple feed, right? Which is you breastfeed the babies, then you pump, and then you also bottle feed them. And so if you do that for the whole two, when you start out, that probably takes you an hour and a half to 2 hours to get through for both kids. Over time, you can really, squeeze it down. 45 minutes, I think, was our record when we were really had it set up. And so, for a very, for 4 weeks or more, it was this cycle of just sleeping for a few hours. You wake up, you would do that. And that was all you really could do. So trying to have some control over the time that you were awake and just get something done felt like that control that you need. And I think that's part of
Mhm.
really what kept me from asking for help, because I just wanted to have an accomplishment of doing something, because I felt like all I did was sleep and feed a baby, which was true. That is all I did.
Yeah, yeah, people would I think a lot of women would be like that if they're type A, as you say you are, because you need to have this productivity going on and doing a lot of tasks like checklists and stuff. I can imagine myself being the same. So, and now when I speak with women, I do have these expectations that are a bit different from probably a lot of women that they are moms now. And would were your expectation like clashed with the reality when you became a mom?
Um, I think there was definitely an idealized concept. And again, I think it might have been more, maybe some people have that with a singleton, but I always joke that even during my pregnancy, every movie you watch is this woman and she's laying in bed and she's surrounded by the pickles and the ice cream and the chips and all of that. And from my experience, I couldn't eat any of that. I went from being nauseous to being too big to eat food, in any large quantities. And so, those sort of silly expectations didn't come true. And then I think the biggest change was, I think there's so much focus on being able to really enjoy your baby and have these special quiet moments, especially while breastfeeding. And for me, there was always another child that needed attended to. So to me, I very much felt like I didn't get those sort of quiet moments where I could just really enjoy and relax and not be worried about what was next. I think that was probably the biggest disappointment for me in having twins, in that you just didn't feel like you got to sort of enjoy the moment that you were in. And probably that's, partially my reaction to the experience. But I think that was the biggest difference, in that it was just kind of an always on, and really did stay that way for a very long time, to be able to just enjoy, one baby. We still jokingly call it one baby time. And when even when one of our 6 year olds will wake up and come into bed with us in the morning, and it's just the one, it's still such a lovely time to be able to just focus on one at a time. And I know they love it too, just to be sort of coddled on by both parents at the same time.
Yeah, I think there is a different concept of like when I ask people, would you like to have one now and then another one in 2 years, or have like a bigger difference between their age? And every time they like maybe like in the same time, because I know it's gonna be hard, but maybe you just get over it and then it will be like more calm. But in my point of view, I would like not to have at the same time because I think in my expectations it's really hard. But also there are the advantages that now you have reached this point of having toddlers and they're both you have two instead of one.
And we're very grateful for that. They are one another's best friend. And when we jokingly say, when it's good, it's really good. There'll be mornings where they'll go off and they're playing ponies or dolls, and we won't hear from them for hours. And they'll be playing lovely together. But when both of them are dysregulated or tired or hungry, then they're so much on the same wavelength that everything just becomes a big disaster. They just started camp this week. And so they've gone from being in school and reading and being fairly sedentary to playing all day. And so they have been quite wound up and bickering when they come home from school. And you don't have the opportunity to say, well, can you just be the grown up for your little sibling? Nope, we're
Yeah.
we're just right there, and everybody's behaving the same way and triggered in the same way. So it's made for some spicy nights lately.
It's doubled. It's like not one but doubled.
Mhm.
And how was your childbirth experience?
My childbirth experience was fairly daunting. I had planned on trying to deliver and did deliver vaginally with my girls, and went in pretty simply with my water breaking. Really didn't feel contractions, but my water broke, and so then came into the hospital on a Thursday afternoon, and then had contractions for a little while. I tried to stay without an epidural for as long as I could, which in the end I wouldn't do again. All it did was really make me exhausted by the time we got around to needing an epidural, because I had been fighting the pain for 12, 18 hours. And then as it started to get too much, then went on an epidural, where I think in retrospect, for me, it would have been a smarter choice to do that earlier. But I really wanted that freedom that you can still have before that. And then the hospital that I delivered at was specialized in high risk pregnancies. So they were definitely more open to continuing to have a natural delivery. And I had a lot of challenges with my daughter. My first daughter uh, was delivered, and then my second daughter then sort of changed positions into a transverse breech. So she was sort of laying crossways, and they had really struggled to get her out, where there was a considerable amount of time and lots of doctors and lots of things that were going on that made it a pretty traumatic experience to have her birthed, which I didn't have any appreciation for in the moment. And so she was finally able to be delivered, but wasn't breathing when she was, and so had to spend some time in the NICU. And in the end, everything turned out fine. But I think at the time, I really didn't appreciate the amount of trauma that created for me, both physically and mentally. And so kind of just went on trudging into having kids. And it was something that it took me a really long time just to process about what a scary period of time that was, and just kind of not feeling necessarily like my health was being prioritized in that. So it's something that I don't tend to share with a lot of other twin mothers, because it was a unique experience, and that's not necessarily others. And I don't think that helps to kind of see that, because I think there was a lot of unique circumstances that happened with mine. But uh, so it was not great. But it's just something that you have to acknowledge what it was, and and move past it. And so that's what I've done.
Yeah, it sounds really traumatic whenever I hear like after 18 hours of pain or something like that. I know even that without having the rest of the story usually can be traumatic. So, and I think we should talk about more how childbirth can be traumatic overall, because it's actually a high percentage of women are experiencing trauma after giving birth, because a lot of complications can happen. And even like in different countries, cesarean is like the primal option, whereas in Western Europe more like it's like you have to wait until your life is really, yeah. And women are really complaining because you've been like 24 hours in pain, and you want cesarean at this point, but the doctors are waiting for the last straw, and then they're like, okay, let's do the operation. It's such a difference here in Bulgaria. Like 50-50 people are wanting cesarean because we have a free choice of whatever we want to. But also the fear of giving birth is quite high here. So I was
Mhm.
curious, were you really scared before that from the whole idea of like giving birth?
I don't know if I was scared. I mean, obviously, there's so much of it in TV and movies, and all of that. And to me, while I had an epidural, so it wasn't unmedicated, that experience, even the pain I had before, and part of even that journey is I was moved from a room to room. So at one part during the several hours before I gave birth, my epidural had stopped working. So then I had a period of time where then I went back to fully feeling the contractions. And then luckily we were able to get it under control before I actually delivered. But to me, it wasn't pain, it was hard work, right? That's how I kind of perceived it. It was the most exhausting thing to do, but it wasn't necessarily painful. So I don't think I was afraid of it per se. Um, but obviously there's just so much unknown. And I think I was more afraid of the unknown, especially with twins, where they do really advise you that, like, well, it's fine for you to make a birth plan, but you should very much not get emotionally connected to that birth plan, because that is most likely not going to happen. And it certainly didn't in my case.
Mhm. Yeah, a fear of the unknown and fear of something going wrong is like the most most quite reasons that women are afraid overall of the concept of giving birth. But I really liked what you said, that it's not about the pain, it's about hard work. Because I think this type of sentence, I would use it, if that's okay, when I speak with other women here. Because I think this is a really good psychological mindset to not think about them like it's a process. It's going to be painful, but it's a process, and it's about, you need to work. You need to get, yeah.
Yeah.
And was your birth experience affected your motherhood in the beginning, like the postpartum period?
Yes. So I hemorrhaged quite a bit, lost a lot of blood, which was missed by the hospital. So for some reason, as we were recovering, they hadn't checked iron levels and some other things. I'm certainly not a doctor. But then as we were preparing to leave the hospital, they said, oh, well, we have to run one last set of labs before you can leave the hospital. And then realized that they hadn't addressed this, which again, I hadn't been very active, so I hadn't noticed it. But it was enough that then that I wasn't released, and they said that I needed to take iron as well as additional blood before I would be well enough to leave the hospital. And so that there was definitely a period of just, in addition to just the regular adjustment. Just it was really my strength, and then all of the very personal issues that often women complain about post birth, of having soreness and stinging. I don't know how I felt like I didn't experience any of that. Maybe I was so exhausted from the rest of it, but I really didn't experience any of that pain, where people say that that's really challenging. That wasn't my experience, and so I was lucky in that I was able to stay for a little bit that extra day to get a little bit more care. And then one of my daughters had jaundice, so they wanted also her to stay to get the treatment under lights. So we ended up staying a little bit longer. So I think all in all, I think I was in the hospital from Thursday to maybe Tuesday, and the girls were delivered on Saturday morning.
Hmm. And how do you think like this experience, because it's not, you didn't have like this skin to skin contact that much in the beginning. How did this affected your parenting, like, or after that, like months after that?
Well, I think I was able to, they did give me one of my daughters, but the other one did need to go to the NICU. So I wasn't able to do that. I think more of a shift that, now we kind of look back on jokingly is, so many mothers have the ability with a singleton to breastfeed and allow the baby to fall asleep in their arms. And, then often complain that, oh, the baby won't sleep anywhere but my arms. But because of needing to have that sort of pass off of feeding one
Yeah.
baby, then pumping, then bottle feeding, our girls always went back into their bassinet to sleep. And so they were really great sleepers, but they could only ever sleep, after they were very little babies, in their beds. And so even, throughout all of their infant and toddler, they never fell asleep in my arms when I was rocking. We would joke that, well, the only way to get a snuggle is when they're sick or they're really tired. And even now, we'll joke that they don't want to just sit and cuddle. You have to turn on a TV show and then they'll snuggle up with you. So that's how we cheat and get our extra snuggles in as parents. But I think that was more the change that I think really impacted our parenthood, is just that it made them less dependent on us. And so there was trade-offs, but it also made them really great sleepers where they were able to start sleeping through the night at maybe 8, 9 weeks. And so for us that was a blessing because we were able to get that sleep and begin to recoup and have that strength for the day. So we were lucky in that we had really great sleeper. We had two, but they were great sleepers and great eaters. So we didn't have any extenuating circumstances that made it more complex.
Yeah, I think this is really important if you have to, at least that they can sleep, because sleep is the main fact that really affects the mental health of a mom, especially in the beginning. If her child does not sleep at all, I've seen moms like really, because this means that they might not eat as well, and it's just a cycle of things going wrong. And
And for me, I think for better or for worse, I know that I'm someone who absolutely needs 8 hours of sleep. And in my college days, I tried to do without, and even then I couldn't. So I knew from the get go prioritizing sleep was important. So I got as much as I possibly could because I needed
yeah,
it.
maybe they chose you like that because it's compatible. No,
Yes.
I'm a bit afraid because I don't need that much sleep, and I imagine if my children are like not really good sleepers because of that, maybe. um, and now I wanted to ask you more like the transfer when you started working. How
Mhm.
was that for you? Because you already said a couple of times you're a perfectionist, you like working, and you're a career-driven woman.
Mhm. So returning to work was definitely challenging. I had again recently taken on a fairly new job when I was there. I was probably within the first year and a half at a new role, and so I had discussed with my employer taking time off, and I at the time lived in California, which has um, parental leave that's probably the most progressive in America. It's still not nearly as good as I think there is in some European countries, but for America, it's probably the best place to be. And then my employer was willing to supplement on top of that. But I ended up taking about 8 weeks, and then 4 weeks that was mixed time where I was a couple of days a week and sort of came on a little bit slower. But for me, that transition back was really challenging. Just I worked with primarily a male management team, and so just the dynamics of being in the office very early, staying very late. My team that was a mix of men and women, tried to create an area for me to pump in our office and some things like that. But still, the dynamics of just being in a meeting where there's a 3 hour meeting and your ability to get up and walk away and stop the meeting because I was an integral part. It really caused me to not nearly pump as much as I should. And it made that journey a lot more challenging where never in my journey was I able to produce enough for all my girls all the time. But it sort of just as soon as I went back to work, it started to dwindle and dwindle where it was sort of the icing on the cake. It wasn't really a substantive amount, but it was important for me to try to continue for as long as I could. So it was very challenging in that dynamic because I had always been able to be really singularly focused on my career, and now really being pulled in both directions where I wanted to be with my children, but I also wanted work, and there's just wasn't enough time in the day. And so that was um, difficult to figure out how to maneuver that.
So I asked you about the career path, and you said that it's a really rocky, like how it went with going back to work. But and I wanted to ask you, did the other people, your colleagues, changed your like ways around you? Did they change, like because you definitely changed?
Um, I'm not sure if people treated me differently or changed how I was. I think becoming a parent, I gave me a totally different lens to see other parents with. I think in my previous, pre kids life, that I had always sort of thought that the idea of, mom brain and sort of all of the oh, the kids were up in the middle of the night and sort of all of the things that you hear, I always were like, it's a little overstated. And like, well, is that just somebody who doesn't really want to get ahead and can't they prioritize? And I think I was a bit dismissive of those challenges. And so I think for me, now personally experiencing it, I realized, wow, these people weren't, making a bigger deal out of it or trying to kind of get ahead somehow. It was really that it was that challenging. And so I think it gave me a totally different approach and empathetic view of not only people with parents, but I think it just told me that, wow, work isn't absolutely everything, and there are other things to value outside of work. And so whether that was children or a personal passion, it just gave me a wider lens and more appreciation for what's going on outside of work and a whole person. I was still a demanding boss and worked really hard, but I think it really opened my eyes and made me a better leader, because I think I just saw it previously in my view, and becoming a parent, now I had two different views. And so then I was like, oh, wow, there must be all these other views that I hadn't thought of. And so it kind of helped me begin to think about what else could be out there and what other people need besides what I needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you definitely changed your view that what you're saying, but did your colleagues that weren't the parents, because you definitely changed your view because you became a parent. I can only imagine this is the way to realize the hard work and also the to value a lot things more outside of work. But did your colleagues that were not parents, did they expected you to be the same? Like did they pressure you to, because they didn't understood all the things about children, for instance.
Yes, I don't think that they had any change in expectation of me. And I think that, again, all individuals need to contribute to a work environment. So I think having a different set of standards for someone who is a parent and versus is doesn't make a ton of sense. I even believe that now as a parent, but I think the appreciation for how it gets done wasn't there, in that I was happy to achieve the work, could put out the same results, but needed more flexibility. And that, the things that seemed effortless for them, and I was had primarily male colleagues whose wives were at home caregivers. And so they had that person there. So the question of, hey, we should do this after work, or this business meeting ran late, or let's stay for this meeting, was a different choice for them, where they had someone to back them up. And so I think there was a lot of that they didn't consider, that this, small adjustment in schedule or ask was really quite a bit of work for me to navigate, where for them, it was just a quick text message to say, hey, I'll be home another half an hour late, or the schedule's changing here. And so I think that that was challenging, in that I think that they kind of very periphery or high levels that talked about, like, oh, well, the mom life, and they acknowledged it, but I don't think that they truly understood the differences of the demands. And so I don't think that they were doing it on purpose. But I think just because they hadn't experienced it personally, they couldn't really empathize and understand how different it was.
Yeah, I think I've heard the same thing from other people also. And your experience of changing your perspective when you become a parent, I think it's for most of the people that they don't realize the difference, because it's a huge dramatic difference and transformation, you becoming a parent. And I wanted to ask you actually, what is the best thing about being a parent now?
I think the best thing is the ability to really engage with your child as a person. For me, the very small baby phase was not my favorite. There wasn't that interaction, but to be able to see my child's imagination and have a conversation with them and see them be empathetic or really curious about something, especially with twins, being able to see my children develop very distinct personalities from one another is just really exciting. And it's something that, it's a cliche, but just every day, as much as they can drive you absolutely wild with all of the things they do, every day there's something that you see in them, and it's a beautiful smile, and just seeing them become their own person and discovering all of these unique things for the first time. And there's just um, the sense of imagination and just joy they get in things. It makes just regular plain old life really exciting. It's something special. And again, I think it's one of those things that it's hard to think about if you're not a parent, because I don't feel the same way about other people's children when I see that. But when I see it in my children, it's something very special.
Yeah, it made me excited, and I think that I can only imagine. But when I've asked my mom the same, and it's like that, like seeing your children grow up and having their own options and like decisions in life, and like see how they prosper. And yeah, it sounds really amazing to have children from that perspective. And
Hmm.
as a last question, I wanted to ask you, so having told me everything from now, like you're about your experience with pregnancy, motherhood, etc., what was the one thing that you wished you were aware of back then?
Um, I think the one thing that I probably would have been great to just have more confidence in, and is the probably one piece of advice I try to give others, because I try really hard not necessarily to give others advice, which is um, that parenthood is really your own path, and there is no right way to do it. And especially, with twins, all sorts of people will try to give you advice because it feels so very daunting. So people want to help even more. But you really have to figure out what works for you and your partner or your particular situations. Um, and trust in yourself that you know what you do have solid instincts, and you are going to do well for your child. And so much of parenthood is about doubt and doing it right and all of that. And I think just you know having the trust to listen to yourself and choose the advice that you want to take and ignore the rest. And that's it's tough often when it comes with a lot of family and people who care for you. But I think that was probably um, one of the biggest pieces. And then what feels very contrary to that is just that piece of asking for help, and being able to let people in. Would have made a huge difference. Even though I had supportive family who wanted to help, I didn't let them in nearly as much as I could have.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a really practical and good answer, I would say, because it made me think about all of the people that I've heard before. And this is a like listen to your own circumstances and giving like the context that you live in, what support you have, and so how to make women and moms seek help more easily is the question that still stands. But I think with speaking with a lot of women, doing a lot of research on that hand, I'm trying to understand how are we going to make them seek help and being more aware that they need help. So
Hmm. I
thank you so
think,
much.
though, what you're doing already is such a big step in it, because I think, again, pregnancy can be so isolating. So you're not hearing about other people asking for help. So just even in this, people listening to your podcast, hearing that, oh yeah, well, everybody's talking about how they needed help, so maybe it is really normal that I don't have it all figured out. Um, and finding those groups to connect with, and figuring out how to ask for help. I think partially of just even that overwhelm of not knowing what to ask for, and what I really did need. Um, which so, but I think just letting people know that other people feel the same way is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, to normalize that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It was a lovely conversation I had with you, and I think it will be really useful for our audience. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. I really enjoyed getting to share my story.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.